He first saw her on a night so cold the stars looked like cracked ice hanging over the wide Wyoming sky. The wind rushed across the open fields, sweeping dust and frost through the valley, and the giant cowboy everyone called Bear Harper was heading back to his barn with a lantern in his hand. He lived alone on that ranch miles from town, carrying the weight of a man who'd buried too much in his lifetime. Folks said he was born big, grew bigger, and stayed quiet like a mountain watching over the land. He didn't speak unless he had to, didn't smile unless something truly earned it, and most people didn't try to get close to him. That loneliness wrapped around him like a second coat, something he'd gotten used to, something he never expected to change. So when he stepped into his barn and heard the soft crunch of straw shifting, his first thought wasn't fear. It was confusion. The cows were in their stalls, the horses calm, the lantern light steady. But then he heard it again, the faint sound of someone trying not to breathe. He lowered the lantern, eyes narrowing, and saw a shape curled behind the sacks of grain. A girl. No, not just a girl. A shaking, dirt-covered, runaway thing of a girl with bruises on her arms, scratches on her cheeks, and fear in her eyes so sharp it cut straight through him. Before he could even ask anything, she whispered, "Please don't tell them I'm here." Her voice cracked as if every word hurt. She clutched her arms tight around herself, shivering so hard her teeth clicked. Bear knew trouble when he saw it. Trouble usually came with loud boots, hard fists, and men who liked showing their strength the wrong way. He set the lantern on the nearest barrel, crouched down. Not too close, because he didn't want to scare her more, and said in his low, steady voice, "Who's looking for you?" She shook her head. "Men," she whispered. "Bad ones." The lantern light trembled across her face, and he could finally see she wasn't as young as he first thought. Maybe 19, maybe 20. A woman, but small, starved, running on fear. Bear felt something old and heavy stir in his chest. He'd seen women hurt before. He'd seen what desperation looked like when someone was trying to outrun danger. He kept his voice slow, gentle. "You hungry?" She nodded but didn't move. He grabbed a blanket from the shelf, held it out. "Ain't gonna touch you. Here." She stared like she didn't trust anything warm being offered, like warmth was a trick. But her shaking got worse, and finally she reached for the blanket, wrapping herself in it. Her eyes lifted to his face, unsure. "You gonna call the sheriff?" He rested one forearm on his knee. "Not unless you want me to." She blinked, confused. Most men didn't give her choices. He could see that in her face. Before he could ask again, the sound of riders thundered down the road outside, hoofbeats pounding through the cold night. Bear stood instantly, every muscle in his body hardening. The girl gasped and ducked behind the sacks again. Lantern light flickered, shadows stretching like claws across the barn walls as the riders got closer. Bear didn't need to guess twice. Whoever she was running from had found her trail. And if those men came onto his land thinking they could snatch a terrified woman like she was cattle in an auction, they were in for a rude awakening. Bear Harper didn't let wolves walk into his barn. He stepped outside, closing the barn door behind him with a soft but final thud. For men on horses pulled up at his gate, dust flying, breath steaming in the cold air. The man in front wore a sheriff's badge, but the kind Bear had seen before, the kind bought more with cruelty than law. The sheriff looked him up and down, smirking like he was greeting a wild animal. "Evening, Harper," the sheriff drawled. "We're looking for someone passed through these parts. You see a girl? Little runaway trouble?" Bear didn't blink. "Ain't seen anyone." The sheriff tilted his head. "Funny. Her tracks led straight this way." Bear didn't bother looking at the tracks. He simply let silence hang in the air heavy enough to make the men shift uncomfortably. Another rider, drunk on power or whiskey or both, spat on the ground. "She's a thief. Took things that ain't hers." Bear's jaw tightened. Something about the way they said it felt like a lie twisted into a weapon. "My land," Bear said quietly. "My say." The sheriff's grin sharpened. "If she's here, you better hand her over. Could save you trouble." Bear stepped forward, not fast, but enough that the horses shied back. "Ain't scared of trouble." The sheriff's smirk faded. Bear's reputation stretched all across the county. The giant who could lift a wagon, who worked alone, who didn't take kindly to men who mistreated the weak. The sheriff cleared his throat, trying to recover. Well, if you see her, you're obliged to report it. Bear didn't nod, didn't promise, didn't give anything. The men waited for something, fear, obedience, hesitation, but got none. Finally, they turned their horses and rode off into the dark, muttering to one another. Bear watched until the last hoofbeat faded, then took a long breath, letting the cold air settle the fire inside him. He walked quietly back to the barn, opened the door, and saw the girl huddled low, eyes wide with panic. He shut the door behind him, dusting his hands off like the matter was already decided. "They gone," he said. She let out a breath so shaky it nearly broke him. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked at her carefully. "They gonna keep comin'?" She hesitated before nodding. They think I belong to them." The way she said it wasn't dramatic. It was hollow, like she was repeating a sentence that had been forced on her. Bear's chest tightened. "Nobody belongs to men like that." Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away like she was used to swallowing pain. He could tell she expected him to push her out soon, expected the world to return to being hard and cruel. Instead he said, "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Lila." "Well, Lila," he said, "I ain't giving you back." She drew in a sharp breath. "But they'll ask around town. They'll question people. They might come back." He nodded slowly, thinking. Then something dangerous and protective sparked in his mind. "If they ask," he said, voice low but firm, "you're my wife now." Lila froze like the words themselves were too heavy to hold. He continued, "Ain't a sheriff in this state who'd cross that line without paperwork and a prayer." Lila stared at him, stunned. Why would you do that?" Bear shrugged one shoulder. "You needed someone to stand between you and them. I'm big enough to be a wall." She let out a half-broken laugh, not because it was funny but because shock made everything spin. "I don't even know you. Ain't to skin anything from you," Bear said. "Just keeping you safe." She tucked the blanket closer around herself and whispered, "No one's ever protected me before." Bear's voice softened. "You safe here." She believed him, not because he asked her to, but because something in his tone felt like solid ground. He told her she could sleep in the barn for now while he prepared a place in the house. She tried to argue, saying she didn't want to trouble him, but her legs wobbled when she stood, and he steadied her without touching her skin, offering his arm instead. She leaned a little only because she had no strength left. Inside the house, the fire glowed warm, sending soft orange light across the wooden floor. He set blankets on the couch, poured her warm broth, and stayed on the opposite side of the room so she wouldn't feel cornered. She sipped slowly, her hands trembling around the cup. After a long moment she said, "They ain't gonna believe I'm your wife." Bear sat down in the wooden chair by the window, his posture calm but protective. "They'll believe whatever I tell them." She searched his face again, trying to understand a man who helped without wanting anything back. "Why you alone out here?" He thought about that. Thought about the storms in his past, the mistakes, the people he'd lost. But he only said, "Life got quiet after a while." She nodded slowly. Sometimes quiet is safer. He watched her fight sleep, eyelids heavy, breath slowing. "Get some rest," he said. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you here." She lay down, her spine still stiff with caution, but within minutes exhaustion dragged her under. Bear sat awake for a long time, staring into the fire, listening to the wind push against the cabin walls. He wasn't a man who invited change. He wasn't a man who asked for company. But tonight, a runaway girl had hidden in his barn, and something inside him, something old, bruised, yet still alive, rose up like a shield. If danger came back, it would have to get through him first. And for the first time in years, Bear Harper didn't feel quite so alone. He felt like he had a purpose again, something worth standing tall for. The night stretched on, quiet but heavy with the promise of trouble, and Bear knew the men would return. But next time they wouldn't find a scared girl. they'd find a mountain of a man standing in front of her, declaring to the world, "If they ask, she's my wife now." And no one, absolutely no one, wanted to pick a fight with a mountain. The next morning broke slow and pale over the valley, the kind of dawn that painted the frost silver and made the old wooden fences glow. Bear Harper was already outside splitting logs when Lila stepped onto the porch, wrapped in the wool blanket he'd given her. She looked better in the daylight, still fragile, still worn, but not the terrified shadow he'd found hiding in his barn. The sun touched her hair, and she blinked up at him like she wasn't sure this peace, was real. "You hungry?" Bear asked without stopping his work. Lila hesitated, like she wasn't used to answering questions honestly. "A little. There's food on the stove. Go help yourself." She nodded, walking back inside, still glancing over her shoulder toward the road like she expected riders to appear at any moment. That fear clung to her like smoke, and Bear felt it sit heavy on his shoulders. When he finished stacking the wood, he stepped inside the cabin. Lila was sitting at the table, hands wrapped around a tin cup of warm coffee, staring down at it like she was waiting for someone to snatch it from her. "Slept all right?" he asked. She shook her head. "I kept hearing hooves." Bear nodded. "They ain't comin' right now, and if they do, I'll know before they get close." Lila studied his face. Bear was the sort of man people listened to when he spoke, the kind you didn't question because you knew he meant every word. There was a steadiness in him she had never experienced before. She took a quiet breath. "Why would they lie?" Bear pulled out a chair across from her. "About you bein' a thief?" She nodded. "'Cause men like that lie the way rattlesnakes bite," he said, quick and without much thought. Her hands tightened around the cup. "They said I stole jewelry and money, but I didn't. I ran." "Ran from what?" he asked. Lila stared at the wooden table's grain lines like she was reading a past she wished she could forget. Finally she whispered, "A man who bought me." Bear went still, every muscle locked like iron heated too long. She swallowed hard. "Said I owed him. Said I had no choice. I worked, cleaned, cooked, did whatever they told me. But he wanted more." Her voice cracked. "I ran before he could take it." Bear Harper had lived through storms, betrayals, and the kind of anger that could break a man from the inside out. But nothing made him burn like hearing what had been done to her. "You ain't going back," he said firmly. "Not now, not ever." Lila lifted her eyes, filled with disbelief. "But the sheriff, he works for him. He always finds the girls who run." "He ain't finden you," Bear said. "Not on my land. And if he asks, like I said, you're my wife." She swallowed, nervous. "What if they ask questions?" "Then I'll answer for you," he said, steady and calm. "You just stand beside me and let me carry the weight." Lila didn't answer, but she nodded slowly. She didn't trust the world, but she trusted him more than she trusted anything else right now. Later that morning Bear saddled his horse. "Goin' into town," he said. "Need supplies. You stay here, keep the door locked. Nobody comes in but me. Understand?" Lila nodded, clutching the blanket. "What if they show up while you're gone?" Bear looked her straight in the eyes. "They won't. They're still riding circles trying to pick up a trail. By the time they guess you might have come this way, I'll be back." She watched him ride off across the wide land, the cold air turning his breath to smoke. He was a giant on horseback, moving with steady power, and every step felt like a promise of safety. But the moment he was out of sight, silence settled over the cabin too thick to bear. Lila shut the door, locked it, then walked to the window and sat where she could see the road. Her heart thudded with every gust of wind. She kept remembering the sheriff's smirk, the cruel eyes of the men who chased her, the way they laughed at her fear. Hours passed slow as winter molasses. Meanwhile, Bear rode into town like a man with nothing to hide and nothing to fear. Folks greeted him cautiously, nodding at the giant cowboy and giving him space. He tossed flour, beans, salt, and coffee into his cart, then added extra blankets and soap. The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow. "Expectin' company?" Bear simply said, "Winter." The old man nodded, not daring to pry. But just as Bear stepped out of the general store, he saw the sheriff's men tying their horses outside the saloon. Their presence soured the street like rot in a cellar. The sheriff spotted him right away. "Harper," he called, walking toward him with that too easy grin. "You sure you ain't seen that runaway girl?" Bear's eyes hardened. "Told you last night. I ain't seen nobody." The sheriff studied him like a man sniffing out a lie. "She's valuable property, you know?" Bear's jaw flexed. "Ain't nobody property." The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "Well, if she crossed your land, you're required by law to report it." Bear stepped closer, towering over him like a thundercloud about to break. "You bring me a law that says I gotta help men like you, and I'll still burn it." The sheriff's smirk twitched. He stepped back. "Careful, Harper. Folks who defy the law tend to get trouble." Bear didn't blink. "Trouble knows where to find me." He loaded his supplies and rode home with tension gripping him like a vice. He'd dealt with danger before, but this was different. This time, the danger had a face, a name, a girl who had no one else. When he reached the cabin, he saw Lila waiting at the window, breath fogging the glass. She rushed out before he could dismount. "Everything okay?" Bear nodded. "For now." He helped her carry the supplies inside. Lila watched him, worry creasing her brow. "They're gonna come here, aren't they?" "Eventually," Bear said honestly. "But when they do, I'll be ready." That evening, Bear showed her how to load his old rifle. Not because he wanted her to fight, but because he wanted her to feel like she wasn't helpless. She handled it with shaky hands. "I don't want to shoot anyone." "Then don't," Bear said gently. "Just know you can if you have to." Something softened in her eyes. Trust. A kind she'd forgotten existed. Over the next few days, something strange and quiet began to bloom between them. Lila cooked while Bear chopped wood. She mended an old shirt of his while he fixed a loose hinge on the door. She'd hum softly sometimes, barely audible, and Bear found himself listening, storing the sound away like treasure. They spoke about simple things, how the winters got harsh here, how the creek froze clean as glass, how Bear had learned ranching from his father. But they also spoke about heavier things. Lila told him how she'd grown up passed between people like she was a chore, how she learned early not to cry, not to hope, not to believe in kindness. Bear listened without interrupting, without asking her to stop, without judging. When night fell and shadows moved across the cabin walls, Bear kept the fire going long after Lila fell asleep. He sat guard in silence, the way a man does when he knows danger is circling, waiting for a chance to strike. And danger did come 4 days later. The sound of hooves thundered toward the ranch just after sunrise. Lila froze with a bowl in her hand. Bear was already moving, grabbing his hat, stepping outside, slamming the door behind him. The sheriff and 6 men rode up hard, stopping in front of the house. The sheriff called out, "Harper, we know she's here." Bear stood firm, broad as a barn, silent as a stone. The sheriff sneered. "If you're hiding her, you're breaking the law. Hand her over." Bear crossed his arms. "My wife ain't going nowhere." One of the men leaned forward. "We know she ain't your wife. She's a runaway." Bear's voice dropped to a dangerous rumble. "She ain't running now." The sheriff spat. "You expect us to believe a girl like her married a brute like you?" Bear didn't flinch. "Believe whatever you want." The sheriff swung down from his horse. "Move aside." Bear didn't, and the earth itself felt the weight of that choice. "You're obstructing justice," the sheriff snarled. "You ain't justice," Bear said. "You're a bully with a badge." The sheriff's face twisted, and he reached for his gun. But Bear was faster. Not with violence, with words. "Touch that gun," Bear warned quiet and sharp. "And every man here will know you drew on a married woman's husband while trespassing on his land." The sheriff hesitated. Image mattered to men like him. "Bring her out," he demanded. Bear turned, opened the door and said, "Lila." Lila stepped out slowly, trembling but determined. She moved to stand beside Bear, her small frame barely reaching his chest. Bear placed a steady hand at her back. not touching her skin, just guiding her. "Tell him," Bear said. Lila swallowed hard. "I'm his wife." A murmur rippled through the riders. The sheriff scoffed. "This is ridiculous. You think a girl like you belongs with him?" Lila lifted her chin, eyes shining with courage she didn't know she had. "I belong where I'm safe." Bear felt something swell in his chest. Pride. Deep, quiet, fierce pride. The sheriff glared at Bear. "We'll be back with paperwork, witnesses, proof." Bear stepped forward. "Bring what you want. But if you set foot on my land again without a warrant signed by a real judge, you'll be the ones breaking the law." The sheriff froze. He knew Bear wasn't bluffing. Finally he snarled, mounted his horse, and spat. "This ain't over." "It is for you," Bear said. "She's done bein' hunted." They rode off, furious and humiliated. When the dust settled, Bear turned to Lila. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. He guided her inside, closing the door softly. Lila burst into quiet tears, the kind a person hides, not wanting to be a burden. Bear knelt beside her. "You did good," he said softly. "You stood tall." "I was so scared," she whispered. "Bravery ain't about not being scared," Bear replied. "It's about protectin' what matters even when you are." She looked up at him, tears trembling on her lashes. "Why are you helping me? Why are you risking so much?" Bear's voice was thick, deeper than before. "Because everyone deserves one person in this world who won't let em fall." Lila took a shaky breath. "And for me, that person is you?" Bear hesitated, then nodded once. Slow. "Sure." Lila leaned forward, resting her forehead lightly against his chest, not asking for anything more than a moment of safety. Bear wrapped his arms gently around her, his strength folding around her like a shield. For the first time in years, Lila felt the world stop chasing her. And for the first time in a lifetime, Bear Harper felt the empty house around him fill with something warm, something hopeful, something like family. The sheriff might return. Trouble might rise again. But whatever storm was coming, they would face it together. Not a runaway girl and a lonely giant, but two people who finally found someone worth standing up for. The days after the sheriff's visit came like slow, careful breaths. The ranch felt different now. Not just a lonely stretch of land with an empty cabin, but a place where two lives gently brushed against each other, learning the shape of safety. Lila woke earlier each morning, helping with chores even when Bear insisted she didn't have to. She fed the chickens, swept the porch, washed dishes with sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Every so often she'd pause, hands in soapy water, eyes drifting toward the road, the fear still living in her like a ghost that hadn't found the door out. Bear noticed every one of those moments. He didn't say anything at first, didn't press her. He just made sure he was always within sight, always steady, always calm, as if his presence alone could convince her the world wasn't waiting to hurt her again. One afternoon, while Bear was fixing a loose plank in the fence, Lila approached him slowly. "Bear." He looked up, pushing his hat back. Do you ever get lonely?" Bear tapped the hammer against the wood, thinking. "Sure," he said. "Anybody who lives this far from town gets lonely." Lila traced the edge of the fence with her fingers. "I used to think being alone was safer. Nobody to hurt you, nobody to control you." Bear set the hammer down. "And now," she hesitated, voice small. "Now it feels bigger than I thought. Heavier. Like I don't know what to do with quiet when it's not full of fear." Bear leaned on the fence. "Quiet's different when it ain't empty," he said. "Different when someone else is in it with you." Lila looked away quickly, cheeks warming, and Bear let the silence settle, soft and warm like sunlight on wood. But peace never lasted long in a world where men like the sheriff walked with badges they didn't deserve. That evening, Bear noticed tracks near the south field. Fresh boot prints, too deep to belong to him, too many to be a lone rider. Someone had been watching, maybe scouting, maybe planning. He didn't tell Lila right away. No need to stir her fear until he had to. But he kept his rifle by the door, checked every latch twice, and stayed awake half the night listening for hoofbeats. Lila noticed the shadows under his eyes the next morning. She set a plate of eggs in front of him. "You didn't sleep," she said softly. He shrugged. "You did. That's what matters." Lila frowned. "Bear, you don't have to protect me every second." "Ain't protectin' you," he said gently. "Protectin' us." Her breath caught. That word had never belonged to her before. Felt like stepping into a warm room after years of cold. After breakfast, Lila went to gather eggs while Bear saddled his horse. "Goin' to check the far fence," he said. "Shouldn't be long." Lila nodded, but something unsettled flickered in her expression. She didn't like him going far. He didn't like leaving her alone, but he couldn't trap her in fear, not after all she'd run from. "I'll be back before noon," he promised. She gave a tight smile. "Okay." But noon came and went. Bear was late. Not hours late. Just long enough for fear to creep under Lila's skin like cold water. She paced the porch, eyes scanning the road. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of dust and something else. Something wrong. At last she saw Bear riding toward the house, but his horse was moving faster than usual, and Bear's face was carved in stone. Lila ran to meet him. "What happened?" Bear dismounted in a single heavy step. "Riders," he said. "3 of them. They were camped near the creek." Her breath stuttered. "Did they see you?" "They saw me," he said, "but they didn't approach. They're waitin' for something. Or someone." Lila's hands shook. "They're getting closer." Bear set a hand on her shoulder. Not gripping, just grounding. "I ain't lettin' them take you." Her voice trembled. "But if they keep coming, then we keep standin'." That night, Bear propped a chair against the front door and sat with his rifle across his lap. Lila lay on the couch, unable to sleep, watching the fire's glow flicker across his face. "Bear," she whispered, do you ever regret helping me?" Bear shook his head, slow and certain. "Only regret I got is not finned in you sooner." Lila swallowed hard. "What if helping me gets you hurt? Or worse?" Bear leaned his head back, eyes half closed. "A man's gotta choose who he wants to be. I chose the kind that don't let wolves steal from his door." Lila blinked away, the tears gathering. "I don't want anything to happen to you." His eyes opened, warm and steady. "Nothing's gonna happen that we can't handle." Days passed with tension coiled tight around the ranch. Each morning Bear checked the fields. Each night he sat guard. Lila started leaving notes on the table for him, little things. "Eat, rest some. I'll make coffee." He kept them all stuffed in his vest pocket, though he'd never admit it. One afternoon, after helping him stack fresh hay, Lila leaned against the barn wall, breathless. "Bear." He wiped sweat from his brow. "Yeah. Do you want me here?" she asked quietly. He stared at her for a long moment. "Want you here?" he repeated. "Lila, this house was empty before you. Now it ain't." Her throat tightened. "But I don't want to be a burden." Bear stepped closer, voice low. "You're the first good thing that's walked into my life in a long time. Don't call yourself a burden." Lila's eyes shimmered, and she looked away quickly, hiding the way the words hit her like a promise she didn't know she was allowed to receive. But the world didn't care about their fragile peace. Trouble came back 3 days later. Just past sunrise, the faint dust cloud of riders rose on the horizon. Lila spotted it first. "Bear," she whispered, voice shaking. He stepped outside, rifle already in hand. "Inside," he told her. "No," she said, surprising him. "I'm standin' with you." Bear hesitated, but the fear in her eyes wasn't cowardice. It was determination. He nodded once. "Stay behind me." The riders came fast, 7 men this time, not 3. And the sheriff rode up front like a man who believed the land already belonged to him. "Harper!" he shouted, pulling up hard. "Time's up. Bring her out." Bear didn't move. "Ain't bringin' nobody." The sheriff grinned. "Then we're talkin' her." Bear's voice dropped into something dark and ancient. "Try." Lila stood behind him, fists clenched, heart pounding. The sheriff motioned to his men. Search the house. Bear stepped forward. You put one boot on that porch, and I'll put you in the dirt. The men hesitated. The sheriff did not. He gestured again. Do it. 2 riders moved. Bear lifted his rifle, not firing, just aiming, and the men froze like the barrel was a rattler ready to strike. Sheriff, Bear said quietly, you're making a choice you ain't gonna walk away from. The sheriff's lip curled. She belongs to a paying man. She's property. Lila stepped out from behind Bear before he could stop her. Her voice cracked but carried. I am not property. The sheriff's face twisted. Girl, you don't get to decide. She does now, Bear growled. The sheriff snapped. Enough. He jerked his head at his men. Take her. But before they could move, Bear fired. A single shot into the dirt, inches from the sheriff's boot. The sheriff's horse reared. The men scattered, and dust exploded into the air. Next one ain't warning, Bear said. Next one goes through anyone trying to touch her. Silence. Heavy. Breathless. Dangerous. The sheriff stared at Bear like he was seeing a monster rise from the ground. You're willin' to die for her? Bear took a slow breath. I'm willin' to live for her. Which is worse for you? Lila's heart cracked open at those words. Raw and bright. The sheriff clenched his jaw. You'll regret this. I regret letting you talk this long, Bear said. The sheriff hesitated, really hesitated, for the first time. He looked at Bear, at the rifle, at the house behind him, then back at the men who were suddenly less loyal and more afraid. Finally he snarled. Mount up. We're leaving. The riders turned, angry and shaken. The sheriff glared one last time. This ain't finished. It is, Bear said. You just don't know it yet. The men rode off, the dust cloud drifting behind them like a dying storm. Lila stood frozen until the last hoofbeat faded. Then her knees buckled. Bear caught her before she hit the ground. It's over, he whispered. She clutched the front of his shirt, crying into his chest. You could have been killed. Bear held her gently, the strength in his arms steady as the earth beneath them. Lila, he murmured, I ain't letting anybody take you. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. She cried harder, not from fear this time, but from the first real feeling of belonging she had ever known. Bear lifted her chin with a careful hand. You're safe, he said. As long as I'm breathing, you're safe. Lila looked into his eyes, those deep, quiet, honest eyes, and felt something shift inside her, something she'd thought she lost forever. Hope. She whispered. Bear, I don't want to ever leave. His breath caught. The giant cowboy, the mountain of a man who faced down a sheriff and 7 riders without flinching, swallowed hard. Then don't, he said softly. Stay. Lila pressed her forehead to his chest, and Bear closed his eyes, letting that moment settle into him deeper than anything ever had. The danger wasn't gone. The sheriff would return. The fight wasn't finished. But now they weren't just a runaway girl and a lonely giant. They were something stronger, something rooted, something worth standing their ground for. Together. Sunrise came slow the next morning, spreading a pale orange glow over the ranch as if the sky itself wasn't sure it wanted to wake up. Mariah opened her eyes with a start, remembering where she was, and for a moment she waited for fear to rise in her chest like it usually did. But it didn't. Instead, she felt something strange. Safety. She pulled the blanket closer and listened to the quiet sounds of the ranch waking up. A horse snorted in the distance. A windmill creaked lazily. And somewhere outside, Cole hummed low under his breath. The same kind of tune men hum when they're used to working alone. She stepped outside just as he tightened the saddle on a chestnut mare. He paused, looked up at her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Something warm flickered in his eyes, just for a second, before he cleared his throat. Didn't mean to wake you. She shook her head. You didn't. He motioned with a soft jerk of his chin toward the fence line. I gotta check the far pasture. Coyote's been running too close. You can stay inside. No one'll bother you. She hesitated. Can I help? I don't want to hide all day. He looked at her again, longer this time, weighing something in his mind. Finally, he nodded. Grab a jacket. It's colder out there than it looks. She wasn't dressed for ranch work, but she pulled on an old coat from the peg near the door. It hung loose on her, the sleeves swallowing her hands, but she felt oddly proud wearing it, like she belonged somewhere, even if only for a moment. They rode out together, the prairie opening before them like a wild ocean of grass. For the first time in days, Mariah breathed fully, each breath filling her lungs with more than just air. It filled her with the memory of who she used to be before fear swallowed her life. They reached the back pasture where a fence post leaned crooked, one side chewed or weathered down. Cole dismounted and inspected it. Not coyotes, he murmured. Wind took this down. She watched him work. Quiet, steady, careful. There was something about the way he moved that showed he'd had a lifetime of fixing things alone. She found herself stepping closer. Here, she said softly, holding the post steady as he hammered. Makes it easier. He gave her a faint smile, the smallest one she'd seen but somehow the kind that mattered more than 1,000 words. You learn fast. She shrugged. I had to. That quiet reply settled between them. He didn't push for more. He never did. That afternoon, they rode back to the ranch just as thunder echoed from the northern hills. The wind picked up fast, the kind of wind that warned of trouble. They hurried the horses into the barn, and rain came down in sheets thick as curtains. Inside, with the storm pounding the roof, Cole lit a lantern and handed Mariah a cup of warm broth he'd made earlier. She cupped it in both hands, letting the heat settle her. The rain softened into a steady roar. Then a loud knock hit the barn door hard. Mariah went still. Cole's face tensed. Another knock. Open up. Sheriff's orders. Her breath caught. Cole leaned close to her, his voice barely a whisper. It's all right. Stand behind me. But she shook her head, trembling. If they take me, they won't. His voice was steady, a low promise wrapped in steel. Remember what I said. If they ask, you're my wife. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. She nodded, gripping the edge of his coat as if the cloth itself could protect her. Cole opened the door slowly, lantern light casting long shadows. 3 men stood outside in rain-soaked coats. 2 deputies and a deputy marshal Mariah recognized instantly. The man who had grabbed her, hurt her. The man who had caused every nightmare she couldn't escape. Deputy Marshal Brandt. His eyes scanned the barn like a wolf searching for prey. Evenin' Carter, he said coldly. We're looking for a runaway girl. Dangerous, they said. Frail little thing. Probably hidin' anywhere to avoid consequences. Cole didn't break his stare. Ain't seen anyone. Brandt stepped closer, boots dripping mud onto the floor. Mind if we look around? Cole didn't move. Actually, I do mind. The deputies stiffened. Brandt raised an eyebrow. You refusing a lawful search? Cole let the silence hang for several long seconds before answering. My wife's inside, already asleep. You come stomping around here, you'll wake her. That won't happen. Brandt's jaw twitched. Your wife? I wasn't aware you remarried. Didn't figure I needed to consult you on it. Mariah stayed behind the stall, heart racing so hard she wondered if they could hear it. Brandt sniffed, glancing around again. Rumor is she's young. Real young. Pretty too. Cole's voice lowered, darkening like thunder. Careful. Brandt smirked. Just saying. If she came through here, I'd appreciate you notifying us. She's a criminal. She's a victim, Cole said before he could stop himself. Brandt's eyes sharpened instantly. What was that? Cole leaned in just slightly, towering over him. I said she ain't here. Now unless you boys want to camp outside in the rain, you should move along. Brandt stared at him long and hard, something ugly twisting behind his eyes. Finally, he spat on the ground and jerked his chin at the deputies. Let's go. But if that girl is found here, Carter, you'll be answering for it. They left. The storm swallowed the sound of their horses as they rode off. Cole closed the door, locked it, and exhaled slowly. When he turned around, Mariah was still frozen, shaking. He stepped toward her gently, hands raised as if approaching a skittish foal. "You're safe," he said softly. "They're gone." But she didn't move. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks, and she pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from making a sound. He hesitated, this giant, tough cowboy who could silence men with a single stare, and then he did something she didn't expect. He opened his arms. No words, just a quiet offer of shelter. Mariah stepped into him without thinking, burying herself against his chest. He held her carefully, like she was something fragile that the world had already tried too hard to break. "I won't let them take you," he murmured. "Not ever." She closed her eyes, feeling, for the first time in her life, not invisible, not hunted, not alone. And outside, the storm kept raging, but inside the barn, something steady and strong was forming between them, something neither of them dared name yet. But both of them felt it, and both of them needed it more than they could admit. The storm lasted through most of the night, pounding the ranch like the sky was trying to wash the whole world clean. Mariah didn't sleep much. Even after the deputies left, even after Cole locked every door twice, even after he handed her a dry blanket and stayed awake in the chair nearby just so she wouldn't feel alone, her mind kept running. Every crack of thunder felt like footsteps. Every gust of wind felt like a hand reaching for her. Near dawn she finally drifted off for a little while, only to wake with a small cry, breath shaking, heart racing. Cole was already watching her, eyes soft with worry beneath all that quiet strength. "Bad dream," she nodded. He didn't ask what it was. Instead, he set a cup of warm coffee on the table beside her. "Storm's passing," he said gently. "You're safe." She wrapped both hands around the cup, letting the warmth pull her back to herself. "Thank you," she whispered, "for last night, for everything." He shrugged, looking away like he wasn't used to gratitude. "Ain't nothin'. Anyone with sense would protect you." "Not everyone does," she said quietly. The way he froze told her he understood the weight in her words. Later that morning, the ranch woke with the familiar rhythm of chores. Mariah helped despite Cole insisting she rest. She brushed the horses, fed the chickens, even swept the barn floor. Cole watched her from time to time, and though he tried to hide it, she caught a small smile on his face when she wasn't looking. It was peaceful, more peaceful than she'd known in years. But peace in the Wild West never stayed long. Just before noon, they heard a wagon approaching. It wasn't the sheriff's men this time. It was someone worse. Cole stiffened the moment he saw the red paint on the wagon wheels. A traveling judge. And not the fair kind. Judge Harlan Graves, known across counties as a man who cared more about bounties and bribes than truth. He'd put innocent people behind bars and let the guilty walk free, all depending on who lined his pockets. Cole muttered under his breath, "This ain't good." Mariah froze, fear spreading through her like cold water. Cole stepped in front of her instinctively. "Stay behind me. Don't say a word unless I tell you." Judge Graves climbed down from the wagon, brushing dust off his fine coat even though the road hadn't been dusty since the rain. He walked like he owned every acre his boots touched. "Carter," he said with a thin smile, "I heard a rumor you're harboring a fugitive." Cole's jaw tightened. "Then you heard wrong." The judge clicked his tongue mockingly. "A girl escaped custody. They say she attacked an officer. Dangerous. Unstable." Mariah felt those words hit her like a whip. She hadn't attacked anyone. She'd defended herself. But men like Graves didn't care about truth. Only power. Cole stepped closer to Graves, shoulders squared. "You ain't searching my property without cause. A runaway girl is cause. Not if she ain't here." Judge Graves' eyes narrowed. He looked past Cole, scanning the barnyard, the corral, the porch. "Funny. Deputy Marshal Brandt seemed certain she'd passed through this area. And since you two don't get along." He let the words hang like a threat. Cole didn't flinch. "Don't matter if we get along. I ain't hiding anyone." Graves tilted his head. "So if I knock on that door right there and ask your wife to step outside, she will?" Mariah's breath caught. Cole didn't move. "She's resting." "Then wake her." No, the judge blinked, surprised by how firm Cole's voice had become. Cole stepped forward until the judge had to take a small step back. No man barges into my house and starts damning in. I wake my wife like she's some animal he can inspect. The word wife chow a fiend. Night hung heavy over the ranch, thicker than the darkness itself. Mariah slept only a little, waking every few minutes to the sound of wind, or a creak in the walls, or the steady steps of Cole walking the floor as he checked and rechecked every window and door. He didn't sleep at all. Before dawn, a pale gray light began to creep across the plains. Cole knocked gently on her door. "Time to go," he said softly. She dressed quickly, heart pounding. She knew they needed to leave early, but the fear that gripped her chest felt like it was made of ice. When she stepped outside, the air was bitter cold. Cole already had the horses saddled, their breath rising like fog in the darkness. He offered her a hand to mount, and she took it, noticing the warmth in his palm, grounding her. "We ride fast until we hit the ridge," he said. "Then we cut through the canyon. Fewer eyes there." She nodded. She trusted him, more than she'd trusted anyone in years. They rode out just as the first hint of sunrise brushed the sky pink. The prairie was still, too still, as if holding its breath. Cole kept glancing behind them, his jaw tight. Mariah felt it too, that crawling sensation between her shoulder blades, like they were being watched. "Cole?" she whispered. "I know," he said. "Just keep riding." They made it halfway to the ridge before everything went wrong. A rifle cracked through the morning quiet, sharp as lightning. Mariah screamed as a bullet struck the dirt just inches from her horse's hooves. Cole wheeled his horse around so fast dust flew everywhere. "Down!" he shouted, voice louder and harder than she'd ever heard it. 3 riders emerged from behind a line of mesquite trees, guns drawn. And leading them was the man Mariah feared most, Deputy Marshal Brandt. His grin spread slow and cruel across his face. "Morning, Carter," Brandt called. "Thought you could sneak off before we caught up?" Cole moved his horse in front of Mariah's without hesitation, shielding her with his own body. "You're breaking the law, Brandt," Cole growled. "You got no warrant, no proof, no right." "I don't need a warrant," Brandt spat. "I got orders. And that girl belongs to the federal office until her trial." Mariah trembled behind Cole, gripping the reins so tight her knuckles burned. "She ain't going with you," Cole said. "She's innocent." "She's mine to deal with," Brandt snapped. "She stabbed an officer. Nearly led him." Mariah's voice broke free without her meaning it to. "Because he tried to?" She stopped herself, breath shaking, the memory crashing over her like a wave. Cole's fists tightened on the reins. His voice came out low, controlled only by sheer will. "She defended herself. From you." Brandt smirked, eyes glinting with something dark. "Ain't nobody gonna believe a runaway girl over a deputy marshal." "I will," Cole said. "And I'll say it under oath." Brandt laughed, a harsh sound. "You think your word weighs more than mine? When the truth comes out, yeah, I do." The air tightened like the world itself was deciding what would happen next. Brandt lifted his rifle. "Move aside, Carter. Last warning." Cole didn't move. Not an inch. "You shoot me," he said quietly, "and the whole territory will know why." Mariah could see Brandt's fingers tremble on the trigger. Not with fear, but with anger. Rage. He wanted her. Not for justice. For control. For revenge. "Fine," Brandt snarled. "If I can't take her alive, I'll take her dead." He aimed past Cole, straight at Mariah. The world shrank to a single moment. So fast, so sharp she barely had time to breathe. Cole saw the shift in Brandt's shoulders before the shot fired. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He threw himself off his horse and pulled Mariah down with him just as the rifle went off. The shot tore through the air where her head had been. They hit the ground hard. Pain shot up Mariah's arm, but she barely felt it because Cole rolled over her, shielding her with his body. "Stay down," he barked. His voice trembled, not with fear for himself, but fear for her. Another shot rang out, then another. Cole fired back, precise and fast, forcing Brant's men to scatter behind rocks. The horses panicked, rearing and neighing, dust exploding around them. Mariah crawled toward Cole, but he grabbed her shoulders firmly. "Don't move," he said, eyes fierce. "I'm not letting them take you. Not now, not ever." She wanted to say something. "Thank you. Don't get hurt. I'm scared." But the words tangled in her throat. Brant shouted to his men, "Take the girl! Leave the cowboy!" Cole's eyes darkened with something Mariah had never seen in him before. "Promise. A dangerous one. Over my dead body," he said. Brant raised his rifle again, this time aiming for Cole. Before he could fire, a sound boomed across the ridge. A different gunshot. Loud. Close. Brant jerked, startled, and spun his horse around. A lone rider was galloping across the ridge toward them, firing warning shots into the sky. The figure rode hard, dust flying behind them. As they approached, Mariah recognized the red bandana tied around the horse's bridle. It was Sheriff Dalton, the only lawman in 3 counties who didn't bow to Brant's corruption. Brant cursed under his breath. "Damn it!" The sheriff rode straight between the 2 groups, gun drawn. "Lower your weapons," Dalton roared. "All of you." Brant glared. "Sheriff, this is federal business." "Not anymore," Dalton snapped. "I got word from Willow Bend last night. A complaint was filed against you." Brant's jaw tightened. "By who?" The sheriff pointed directly at Mariah. "By her. And a doctor confirmed her injuries weren't self-inflicted." "That officer you said she stabbed? He's confessing." Brant's face drained of color. "That's a lie." Cole stood slowly, helping Mariah up with him, keeping her close. Dalton continued, voice booming. "Judge Graves ordered an investigation. You're suspended pending charges." For the first time, Brant looked afraid. One of his men muttered, "Brant, maybe we should go." Brant whipped his head toward him, fury twisting his features. "We're not done here." But the sheriff leveled his gun. "The hell you're not. Drop your rifle." Brant didn't. Not at first. His eyes flicked to Mariah, cold, hateful. "This isn't over," he said. Then he threw his rifle to the dirt. The sheriff motioned for his deputies to take Brant into custody. They hesitated, but Dalton's glare left them no choice. As they rode off with him in shackles, Brant twisted in his saddle, screaming, "You'll regret this, girl. Both of you." Only when the dust finally settled did Mariah realize she was shaking uncontrollably. Cole stepped close, his voice soft again. "It's over. You're safe." She looked up at him, tears slipping down her cheeks. You jumped in front of a bullet for me." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "I'd do it again," he said. "Every time." She swallowed hard, overwhelmed. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. His chest rose with a slow breath. "Because somewhere along the way," he whispered, "protecting you stopped feeling like something I had to do, and started feeling like something I couldn't live without." Mariah felt her heart stumble, then settle into a rhythm it had never known before. Steady, certain, safe. Cole wasn't just the man who saved her. He was the man who chose her, and she knew now she'd choose him too. The ride back to the ranch felt different. Quieter, softer. Like the land itself finally let go of the fear that had hung over it for days. Mariah rode beside Cole, her fingers still trembling from everything that had happened. But each time her horse shifted or the wind blew too hard, Cole glanced over at her to make sure she was steady. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. Sheriff Dalton rode with them partway, making sure no stray riders tried to follow. Before turning toward town, he stopped his horse and looked at Mariah with a firmness that didn't hide the kindness underneath. "Justice'll be served," he said. "Brant won't be harming anyone else. Not anymore." Mariah nodded, but the emotions inside her were too heavy for words. Cole tipped his hat. Dalton rode off, dust rising behind him until he faded into the hills. Cole and Mariah continued on alone. When the ranch came into view, a warmth settled over her chest. It wasn't just a safe place. It wasn't just shelter. It was the first place where she had been seen and believed. When they reached the porch, she slid off her horse too fast and stumbled. Cole caught her instantly, one arm wrapping around her waist. "Easy," he murmured. "You've been through hell. Take a breath." She did. For the first time, the breath didn't feel stolen or trembling. Felt like her own. He helped her sit on the porch step, then crouched in front of her, his tall frame folding down with effort. His eyes, usually guarded and steady, were soft now in a way she had never seen. "You all right?" he asked. "I don't know," she whispered. "Maybe for the first time. I might be." Cole sat beside her, close but not too close, giving her space while still making it clear he wasn't going anywhere. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly. "What Brant did, what he tried to do. The law's gonna handle it now. But you need more than justice. You need a life that's yours again." She turned to him. "I don't know where to start." "Here," he said softly. "If you want." Her breath caught. The wind brushed across the prairie, carrying the smell of rain-wet grass and sun-warmed earth. Felt like a blessing. "Cole," she whispered. "I don't want to run anymore." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something deep and unspoken passed between them. Something tender. Something solid. "Then stay," he said. "Stay as long as you want. As long as you need. Or—" His voice dropped to almost nothing. "Stay for good." She felt tears rising again, but this time they weren't from fear or pain. They were from the overwhelming relief of someone finally choosing her without expecting anything in return. "But when you told the deputies I was your wife," she whispered, "that wasn't real." He exhaled slowly, eyes warming in a way that made her heart ache. "It wasn't a lie," he said. "Not to me. I just didn't know how to say it yet." Her breath trembled. "Cole, you don't owe me anything," he said gently. "Not gratitude, not a promise, not a future. I protected you because you deserve to be protected. Whether you stay or leave, that's your choice." She searched his face, every scar, every shadow of hurt, every unspoken truth. "I want to stay," she said finally. His jaw tensed, not in anger but like he was fighting the urge to believe something too good. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You're the first person who ever made me feel safe. And the first man who ever saw me as a person, not a problem." He swallowed hard, the emotion in his eyes raw and real. "You are not a problem," he said. "You're a miracle." She didn't know who moved first. Maybe she leaned toward him. Maybe he reached for her. But suddenly his forehead rested against hers, his breath mingling with hers. His voice was barely a whisper. "I got you," he said, "and I'll keep having you. For as long as you'll let me." She closed her eyes and let herself fall. Not into danger, not into darkness, but into something steady and good and warm. Days passed, then weeks. The territory buzzed with news of Brant's arrest, Judge Graves' investigation, and the sheriff's testimony that finally exposed the corruption Mariah had been trapped under. When the trial came, Mariah stood in the courtroom with Cole by her side, his presence a shield stronger than any wall. The truth came out. Not just the truth about Brant, but the truth about her courage, her survival, her innocence. When the judge declared her free, Cole didn't cheer or shout. He just reached for her hand and held it tight, the relief in his eyes saying everything he didn't. After the trial, as they walked outside into a world that finally felt safe, she looked up at him and smiled. "Home?" she asked. He smiled back, a small, quiet smile that held more love than any words could. "Home," he said. The ranch welcomed them with open fields and open sky, and Mariah stepped inside not as a runaway girl, not as someone hunted or hiding, but as someone chosen, someone loved. Over time, the story spread across counties. A giant cowboy who protected a girl the world tried to break, a girl who found her strength in the one place she never expected, and two souls who learned that sometimes family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build with courage and tenderness and quiet promises spoken under open skies. And on one golden evening, months later, as the sun dipped low over the prairie, Cole took Mariah's hands in his and said the same words he first spoke in fear, this time with love. "If they ask," he whispered, "you're my wife now." But she smiled through tears, shaking her head softly. "You don't have to say if anymore," she whispered back. "I am." And in that moment, with the wind dancing through the grass and the world finally gentle around them, Cole pulled her close and kissed her, slow, certain, and full of everything they had fought for. The runaway girl was no longer running. The lonely giant cowboy was no longer lonely. And together, they began the life they both deserved. The final life. The safe life. The loved life.